All right, so let's see, there's a couple more people flowing in, but I'll get started with some introductions. Then I'm going to hand it off to John. And since the presentation is being recorded, if someone who's a little bit late is dying to see the intro, they can get it afterwards. So, evening, everyone. I appreciate you guys coming here on a Friday, especially in the middle of December. I realize that's kind of tough to fit into schedules, so thank you. I genuinely appreciate your engagement. So why are we here? In a word, cab. I think a lot of people sort of have this general feeling of, this seems unusual, but they can't quite put their finger on why, or maybe they can precisely name a complaint, but they're not really sure what to do about it. So a little background on me. My name is Jim Soyland. I'm a director on the Metro District 2 board. That might sound a little cryptic if you're less familiar, but spoiler alert for the presentation: if you live in Sterling Ranch, you live in a Metro District. So you'll hear more about that soon, hopefully. I'm on the Metro 2 board, and I do occasionally hear from residents, get coffee with folks, talk to them about how the governance works, because it is unusual, it is complicated, and people are generally skeptical at some point in the conversation. The high level is, you live in a metro district. That metro district is actually subordinate to CAB, so that you can elect people, but they don't really have a lot of pull. The developer is actually in control of the neighborhood. They can use that control to in-debt the residents, and with one hand as the CAB, and then with another hand can actually purchase the bonds that the CAB issues as a private financier. And you don't really have a lot of say in terms of what gets built, how much it costs, when it comes out. Your hands are kind of tied in this CAB arrangement. So some people are skeptical just of that, just of the plain Jane assessment of what's happening. And other folks are skeptical if I say, you don't really have to, it doesn't have to be that way. So there's, I think, a reasonable amount of skepticism. Who's this Jim guy? What does he know? So I figured, why not bring in an expert? So that's why we're here today, is to have an expert in metro districts and their legal need, and someone who's also seen similar situations to ours, who can assess what to do about it. So that leads me to introduce our expert. John Henderson is a retired attorney, and he is a leader at Coloradans for Metro District Reform. So he's seen every flavor of Metro District in the state, and his group is here to be advocates for us. So hopefully he can shed some light on sort of how we got here and what actions are open to us. I confess I haven't seen his presentation, so hopefully that does get covered. I'm confident it will. Everyone is on mute just because there is quite a large attendance, but the format I'm hoping to adhere to is John's going to present for 35-40 minutes. I'll kind of wrap up with a quick summary, and there are two other CMDR folks here. JD Lube is actually helping to administer things, so he'll pass the host capabilities off to John while he's presenting. I'll wrap things up, and then we'll do some Q&A where folks can ask John whatever flavor of questions. And the one thing I do want to note before I hand it off is someone did actually reach out and say, hey, can I help you pay for this attorney's time? John and CMDR are volunteering to help us. I haven't given them a dime, and I think it's really worth noting that this may be the first time anyone has given any kind of legal perspective on the community that isn't actually paid by the community developer. So the interests aren't aligned with John looking to get our business. John's retired. John has things to do. He's here just to help us out and give us a perspective. So please do keep it in mind. I think incentives matter. I think that's a big part of this conversation. So with that, John, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jim, very much for the introduction and the opportunity to meet with you all. Just briefly about myself, excuse me, I am an attorney admitted in Colorado. I've been working on metro districts for better part of 7 years, and during that period of time, doing my research and my evaluations, and for a good part of that time, I've been answering telephone calls, email messages, meeting with people, just like yourselves who live in metro districts, have questions about metro districts, and want to understand what they can do in order to advance their opportunity to control taxing and spending of their money. I get calls from prospective homeowners, real estate agents, parents of prospective homeowners, all asking, what do you think about this metro district? What are the pros and cons? First time I did this, it took me 3 months in my metro district to find the documents, connect the dots. It now takes me about an hour or two, and as I say, I still get several calls a month. So as Jim said, this is all volunteer. That's what I do. I've been engaged in similar activities for well over 40 years. One of my credentials, in addition to being an attorney, that really applies in a very significant way to this work is master's degree in public administration and a fellowship for 2 years with an organization called the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, a private nonprofit taxpayer research and reporting group. And I've applied many of those skills here. In the course of my legal work over the last 40 odd years, I have represented developers, I've represented residents on all kinds of land use issues, along with many other areas of practice. But one thing I have consistently done, no matter what area of practice I was involved with, what I've consistently done is what we're doing right now. And that is looking for opportunities to represent voices that are otherwise unheard, not heard, or even silenced in making local government work. So let's do it. JD, if you'll share with me, I think you already did. Sterling Ranch, Colorado. Folks I've been working with and I have been very interested in Sterling Ranch, Colorado for several years. It presents one of the most challenging government structures in Colorado metro districts, and a fairly modern one that the developer attorneys came up with as a now third way to ensure that the developer controls the decision making, and particularly the taxing and spending, as long as they can. And you'll see why I'm so interested in it in a minute. So you all live in a beautiful community, 3 villages there, very a wonderful area, wonderful homes. I lived in Solterra, very similar. When you all moved there, you were excited about the area, excited about the homes, and were anxious to move in. And along the way, largely as a result of some of our activities and publicity, you may have heard about CAB, and you may have heard that there's a metro district involved. Lots of smiling faces and information to make you feel welcome, and certainly not alarmed by anything to do with a CAB or a metro district. And if you started to ask questions about it, you might be directed to something called the DOLA site, which is a state-run site. And you may have seen something like this: Child Government, the Sterling Ranch Community Board. What is a child government, you might ask? And on the other side, parent governments, each of the 7 districts in Sterling Ranch, Colorado. Now, that may have stopped you right there, and you just went back to enjoying the villages. Let me suggest a reason why you might want to continue the conversation and at least give some scratch to that itching curiosity, because here's what they didn't tell you. Metro District, in your case, is a potential 19 billion, yes, that's billion, debt, and the developer CAB, not you, are in charge. The excerpt that I have there isn't something that I wrote. It isn't something that you saw when you purchased your house. It's an excerpt from a bond prospectus that the developers delivered to the potential bond investors on a silver platter, telling them everything and anything they could possibly want to know about your district. But they didn't tell you, and they didn't tell me. In my case, the total debt authority was 4.9 billion. In your case, it's 19.8 billion. And that's not just numbers on a piece of paper. Here's a bond that was issued in District 2 for 35 million, plus another 4 million in subordinate bonds. And there in the small print is who issued it: the Community Authority Board. Folks in District 3, you may not have known this, or you may not have seen it in any of your documents, but again, the Community Authority Board issued $99 million in debt. And in one of the budgets, they said your exposure was up to 23.4 billion, 23.4 billion, not just the 19 billion that was in the prospectus. What does this mean to you in your home and your budget? Well, speaking of budgets, here's the District 2 budget and the District 3 budget, where the residents live. You generate revenues in District 2 of 3.2 million total, for the income 3.5. Where does it go? General fund and the debt service fund. Literally, where does it go? It goes to the CAB. Same thing for District 3, and there you see transfers to CAB. You pay the taxes to District 2 and District 3, and District 3 doesn't do anything except turn it over to the CAB. And what does the CAB do with it? Well, that's where there's a lot of interesting detail, but just some highlights. They issued a bond, that bond that we saw earlier, $99 million. What they do with that money? They paid bond debt. 2017 bonds paid off $98 million. Debt service bonds, junior bonds, debt service fund notes, facility notes, totaling $162.5 million. That's your tax revenue going to the CAB, and the CAB is using it to pay debt, and as you'll see in a moment, paying the developer. Here again, expenditures by the Community Authority Board. When they get the money, what do they spend it on? Debt. Or transfers to other funds. What fund? Well, you'll have to do some more digging. And then your CAB has an operations and administrative budget. And here are some of the things they're spending your money on. They're spending your money, $200,000 on accounting, almost $3,000 budgeted, $5,000 for recruiting, business development, large tab for legal, other consulting, and investment advisory fee. The CAB is spending your money according to their priorities. Here's another good one, community support services, 3.9, almost $4 million. What is that? So a lot of money, your money, being spent by the CAB. Let's step back a minute and talk about metro districts before we get into the CAB, because many of you are probably thinking of in terms of, well, I live in this village or that village. And as Jim mentioned, he's on the board of directors of a district. And visually on the map, here's what he's talking about. We start with the most important district, that little tiny yellow square. That's District 1. Nobody will live there. It's probably not big enough for more than 2 or 3 people to stand in. But that district has 5 board members, all of whom are either the developer, developer's family, or developer's employees. And as you'll see in a moment, the people in that tiny little box are really important when it comes to the CAB, because that little box has 5 seats on your CAB. And Jim and the rest of you in districts 2 in blue and district 3 in green, you only have 1 seat. The developer in that tiny little box where nobody will ever live has 5 seats on your CAB. And that's not an accident. Here is the current anticipated breakout of all 7 districts, not just one, the tiny little yellow box, and the green and the blue 2 and 3, but they're anticipating 4, 5, 6, 7, but there's nobody there yet. And for today's purposes, they don't really count, except you'll see in a moment why that's interesting. Okay, so you've got districts. What do they do? What's the point of this district? Well, you start with field of cows and you end up with a development. This is my old home in Solterra foothills, just across from Dinosaur Ridge. Starts with this gentleman, developer. He puts the pipes in the ground, the infrastructure. And the question that metro districts address, at least at face value, is how do we pay for those pipes in the ground? Metro district advocates tell you that the metro district will pay for those, and you pay for those after you've actually bought your house. Before that view of metro districts, and in most other parts of the country, the pipes in the ground are actually paid for when you buy your home, because it's included in the cost of the developed lot that the developer sells to this person, the home builder. And just by way of example, I recently came across this in a service plan, financial plan. And the developer said, yeah, I'm selling these lots at $400,000 to $600,000 per lot. I'm selling it to the builder, And the cost of the infrastructure, the pipes in the ground, is about $56,000 per lot. You subtract also from this $400,000 to $600,000 figure the cost of the land, which in this case was about $5,000 per lot. So you just subtract $5,000 per lot for the cost of the land, $56,000 per lot for the cost of the pipes in the ground, from the amount of money that the builder paid to the developer for that developed lot, and that's the profit to the developer after having paid for the pipes in the ground, which in this case was well over 75% profit. So the first question is, well, why do we need metro districts if we're already paying for the infrastructure when we buy the developed lot? The development community, in 7 years of my asking that question, have yet to respond. But let's talk about the CAB, because that's why we're here tonight. Community Authority Board. Title 32 is the statute that authorizes metro districts. It says nothing about a CAB. Title 29 talks about CABs. Documents that we'll look at here in a minute give birth to the CAB. And then we'll talk about some of the law regarding CABs. We start with Title 32. It does not say anything about CABs, does not provide for them, and more importantly, it really anticipates that with each application for service plan, there'll just be one district, not 7, not 3 as in our case, not 5 in another, just one. And it anticipates that as soon as you move in, as soon as you have a contract to purchase your house, you have a right to vote and serve on the board of directors. And the board of directors is the governing body. The board of directors taxes and spends. The board of directors makes all the decisions, and you, the residents, elect the board of directors. That's what Title 32 says. Title 29 says local governments, like a metro district and a city, or a city and a county, or a city and a water board, local governments, separate jurisdictional local governments, are authorized to work together and come up with agreements to have a regional transportation program or build a dam. And they can cooperate and enter into contracts to do that. Not metro districts, not creating 7 metro districts where there should only be one, for the sole purpose of then creating a CAB. That's not what was intended, and that's not what it says. Title 32, one district, board of directors, they're in charge. Title 29, governments working together, city, county, city, water board, metro district, and a city. Not contrived for the purpose of creating a CAB. The documents, let's talk about the documents. We talked about the statutes. The documents that create the CAB, in my opinion, are unenforceable. It's not a contract. It's entered into by the developer with himself. You didn't sign any contract creating the CAB. You didn't vote for the CAB. You didn't even know about the CAB when you purchased your property. You didn't promise or exchange anything of value regarding the CAB. And as you'll see shortly, it's against public policy, a violation of Title 32, Title 29, and the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. So let's look at that document. Here it is. establishment agreement by and between all 7 districts as recently as 2020. We're going to hit some of the highlights. One of the first things I tell you is there was an election in 2013, and a majority of those voting voted to create a CAB. We'll see what that election looks like here in a minute. The CAB allows that the districts will contract with one another for these districts, and that will be the CAB board. The purpose is to bind the districts, and they mean it. They mean bind you tight. The intent of the districts is to issue its own debt, not debt issued by the district created under Title 32, but by the authority board. The bonds issued by the CAB will be based upon estimates of capital costs. Well, who's going to make those estimates? The CAB. The public improvements will be financed by mill levies. Who sets the mill levy? The CAB. And in this agreement, the districts signing it, the individual districts signing it, reflecting the vote of the residents, acknowledge that this CAB is part of the service plan, and any unilateral material departure is a material modification of the service plan. You can try to amend the service plan, but you first have to get the written approval of the CAB. And here's the golden nugget. Here's how it all works. Each district shall appoint a member representative to the CAB. Well, that sounds a good start. Everybody will be represented. District 1, that little yellow box, shall appoint 5 members. Districts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 1. And of course, right now, there are only residents in 2 of those districts. 5 to 2 on a board that has full control, absolute full control over how your money is taxed and spent. CAB may enter into pledge agreements, and you know that they did, obligating the districts. The districts signed these pledge agreements to give all their money to the CAB. And you saw the budgets. That's what you do. That's all you're allowed to do. That's the only reason you are there, is to pay all of your taxes to the CAB. The CAB shall have the sole authority to withdraw monies. The pledge of the payment. The districts agree to impose the mill levy determined by the CAB. And budgets. Budgets are wonderful things. They tell stories, they're plans, they're aspirational. Budgets are so important, sometimes magical. And in this case, the individual districts, the residents, have 2 choices. You can either approve the CAB's budget or propose in writing some additions. But make no mistake about it, the district shall have no right or authority to object or propose additions or deletions once that budget is presented. Footnote, for those of you that are interested in covenant enforcement, there is a provision to terminate your relationship with the CAB's enforcement services. And that's something that you may want to get into more deeply. Okay, so those were the highlights. And here is the grand finale. I just love doing this because I've looked at, I don't know how many, but let's say somewhere between 20 and 50 these agreements, similar agreements, and they never cease to fail. Here are all the people who approved this agreement on behalf of the developer, District 1, and all the districts. I can't read the signature, but as you see, it's the same dude. And who is this guy? He is the president of Sterling Ranch Development Company. So when I say the developer entered into an agreement with himself, I mean it. There ain't anybody else signing this document. It's the developer entering into an agreement with himself. And this developer, of course, has a conflict of interest with the residents. They mentioned that election in 2013. Well, here's what that looks like. Here is the result of that election, November 2013. They elected board members, Ms. Smethills, Mr. Smethills, obviously family members, developers, and their associates. And in that election, they also had a Tabor election, and they voted, those folks voted to impose upon you all a debt authority of up to 14.7 billion. Here, they approved an interest rate of up to 18%. And in this last section, they took away your right to ever vote on taxes or bond debt. The only ones who can do it are, in this case, the CAB. Tabor says, as part of the Colorado Constitution, you have the right to do that. You are the residents. There must be an election where you vote to increase taxes or issue bond debt. But Tabor also has a provision that says the voters can vote to give up that right. Well, the developers did it for you, and that was awfully gracious of them. They voted to eliminate your right to ever do that for the next 20 years. And oh yeah, there was a ballot issue saying that the district can enter into IGAs to perform some of these functions. And they voted on that. And here's the vote, 5-0. Not very controversial, right down the line. 5 members of the developer's family or his employees. That was the election. That is the election that was promoted in the bond prospectus. And there's nowhere in that 255 pages of the bond prospectus that tells the bond investors or anyone else that the people who voted to impose debt authority of over $19 billion were 5 people. In my vision, sitting around the table eating pizza one night, and they voted to impose that debt authority, 18% interest, and take away your right to vote. That's the document. That's the ballot issue. Let's talk about some of the law. Equal protection, one person, one vote. We've heard it, you studied it, various levels of school. It really means something. One person, one vote. Not 5 votes for somebody who doesn't even live there or pay taxes in the district. Not 5 votes for that person and only 1 vote for you. 1 vote per person. And this issue has come up in special districts. And the Supreme Court has made clear members of an elected body are chosen from separate districts. Each district must be established on a basis that will ensure, as far as practical, that equal numbers of voters can vote for proportionally equal numbers of officials. It's a fundamental principle of representative government. Here are some cases that address it in the context of special districts. And the bottom line is There's no question equal protection clause applies to special districts. There is no question that the proprietary government exception does not apply, which basically says if it's more a private business than a government, then the equal protection clause won't apply. But the facts are, this is a government. But even if, and some of the developers have argued this, even if the proprietary government exception does apply, then they've got a problem with the IRS, because then there's no tax exemption because it's not a government entity. And if it's not a government entity, there's no tax exemption, no financial motivation to do a district, and there's no market for municipal bonds. And here's the tax memo that talks about that in a Florida case. And in essence, it was a metro district. And here's what they said. We believe that the entity is organized and operated and meant to perpetuate private control and avoid indefinitely responsibility to a public electorate. That's a CAB. The board was selected by a majority vote of landowners. At all times, the developer was in a position to select all members of the board. The developer and the partnership held a clear majority. The result was that during the relevant years, the board was composed of individuals who were members of the family, directors, or employees of the developer. The board and its district manager controlled the day-to-day operations, and they concluded that that was not an entity eligible for tax-exempt status. Okay, let's bring you back home, literally. You have a choice. Freedom from the CAB is an option. It's a choice. The CAB is the opposite. Is the opposite of self-government. And here are some thoughts. You need counsel without a conflict of interest. That is the first step in any effort to establish resident control over your taxing and spending, because the developer's attorney is always going to represent the developer's interest. In the context of the CAB, they can hardly argue against a document that he or she or one of their colleagues prepared. You need access to your own money. It's your bank. You need your bank account, direction to a county to deposit your tax revenue into your account, and then pass your budget. I'm not sure you're going to spend as much money on recruitment, spend money on the developer's attorney to represent the developer against you. You will have your priorities, and self-government through the budgeting means that you make decisions about how to spend your money. And finally, working with your attorney to terminate or redefine your relationship on your terms. At any rate, always a pleasure. Look forward to your questions. Thanks so much. I think I need, hold on a minute. Okay, JD, your host, sorry.
No problem, John. Thank you very much. Jim, I'm going to unmute you so you can have a couple thoughts in here real quick. And then we've got a couple hands and something in the chat as well. So give me just a second. Okay, asking you to unmute, Jim. There you go.
Cool. I saw that some folks got in there. I was getting some messages during the presentation about the waiting room. So, John, do you mind just sharing that last slide or the last two slides again, just real fast to recap? So I think part of
Yep.
yeah, never mind. That's on JD. We can return to him later. So I'll just sort of recap my thoughts on what this means, and again kind of say why we're here. So I think that the overall point is, a lot of people say, they're skeptical that the developer will control the cab indefinitely, that the developer can, issue a bond as the cab and purchase that bond. That's all. as John will tell you, that's exactly the case. Once the community is fully built out, they could still retain control of the cab, and it's very profitable for them. I did have someone ask me, well, why would they do that? Well, I mean, if you like easy money, having full control of the cab is a good way to get it. And just to underline, even at full build out, that District 1 parcel gets 5 votes, and it's a little postage stamp. As long as they control one other of those tiny 1 acre postage stamps, they retain control of the cab and its taxing power. So those are some things to keep in mind. And I think the steps that John outlined are pretty concrete. I think you also have to factor in, the Colorado Bill of Rights is pretty explicit. And one of the very first articles is that power is derived from the people and for the good of all the people. If we're not voting, it's certainly, or if you're voting for people, but those people are by definition not in control of the government, that is not a government for the people. So, people are often skeptical when I tell them, you have options, but we really do. And I think that's important to note. And that said, having options is good. And I hope people are a little less in a despair status than I've heard before, where people think, well, we're just in this forever. And, either we wait for control of the cab, which is a bad call, in my opinion. You may never get control, or, we're in this situation, there's nothing we can do. I just want to underline that's not true. If you really want things to change, there are steps that we can take. It's the second part that, needs a little more exploration though. Those steps need to actually be taken. There's that famous MLK quote about the moral arc of history being long but bending towards justice. You have to bend it, right? We have to bend it. And so, I'm happy to help lead and happy to help us, take a little more control of the community. But it can't be just me. It can't be just me and a handful of others. I really need small, sustained help. Attend your Metro District meetings when you can. Be a little fired up about, some of the things you might hear in those meetings, and definitely vote. The last Metro District election here, the turnout was under 30%. So your vote matters, and it matters a lot. And so, the last small plug I'll do is Jason Casse. He's on this call. He's also available on Facebook. I've been sort of I'm going to start directing people to him, just so that we can have a little more of a coordinated effort in terms of folks showing up to meetings, voting, paying close attention. Because those are really the only things we need, is for folks to, maybe educate a neighbor, definitely vote and show up to these meetings, and, kind of hold people's feet to the fire. As John pointed out, right now, the attorney we have is, the attorney for the cab is also the attorney for your Metro District. And the cab is controlled by the developer. Your district doesn't get to retain any of its funds because that's the way things are. And we can change those things. But you have to have a board that's elected by you and wants to make those changes. So please do, if you're concerned, let's reach out to Jason and get some things rolling. So that's really all I have to say. And thanks for your time, guys. And then let's JD, can you unmute people for questions? I saw Kellen had a hand up.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of texts that are coming in, and if you would like to add color as I mention yours, please just raise your hand and I can unmute you. We have a question, I think, here. There we go. Kellen, I'll get you real quick. I'm going to ask this one first because I saw it in the text. Keep your hand up if you'd like so that it helps me recognize that you're there. That's fine. That will be helpful. Perfect. Thanks. So a question comes out and says it's a concrete dollar and cents question. The current total debt of the CAB is 1.8 billion, correct? And there are currently approximately 2,000 occupied homes. So that's about 900,000 debt per home, correct?
That's not quite accurate. So there are different, the 1.8 billion number is a number that gets thrown around. It's in some of the contracts as the aggregate amount of debt that all the districts can issue together. So they all end up with like $1.8 billion in borrowing authority. Think of that as think of that $1.8 billion as the supposed credit limit. But they also have a bunch of documents saying that the total borrowing authority is $23 billion. And so, this is a place where it'd be good to have an independent legal opinion like John's. So the 1.8 billion is like a theoretical maximum amount of debt issuance. That's actually not the maximum amount of debt because some of the debts will accrue interest as they go unpaid. The CAB currently has about $300 million in issued debt. So that's actual debt they've accrued. It's closer to 150K per house, which is still quite a bit. The Colorado Association of Home Builders average for like infrastructure expense debt on a house is between 30 and 40,000. So it's still very high. And one thing I like to underline to people is, I'm under no illusions that parks and pipes and roads get built for free. But it's worth it to ask what you got for that expense and if that expense was reasonable. At this point, the only immensity we really have is the overlook clubhouse and some small playgrounds, which is fair enough. Is it really worth $110 extra $1,000 on your house, in terms of debt? I would argue no. And I would argue that if you, take control of your district, you then at least get a say in what gets built and in how much it costs. You could say that, that overlook clubhouse isn't the rec center that we were sort of promised at build out. And it seems sort of expensive for a, 4,000 square foot facility. That's really what you get when you have this independence, is the ability to have some say in what gets built and how much it costs. So that's a long-winded explanation as to the billions. Issued debt right now is around 300 million. Not all that debt is being paid, and some of it is accruing interest at a pretty rapid clip.
Cool.
So
Barry, I see you want to follow up. I'm going to go to Kellen real quick, and then we'll come right back to you.
Yeah, Kellen, go ahead.
Awesome. Hey, Jim, John, really appreciate both you setting this up in the background. It's been very illuminating. My question really is on that accumulated debt. I saw that there were debt payments going back to 2015 on like this year's balance sheet. And, getting to what that debt has gone to, like what's been built, is there any accounting for each of these bond issuances, what that 99 million, sorry, my daughter is also a very vocal critic.
I got 3 kids, I get it.
Yeah, so is there any accounting like the 99 million that was issued in 2022, like what is that 99 million going to? And I just moved in here last year, so frankly, I'm not sure if I voted on any of these things, but how does the voting process work on how the CAB gets to issue more of these bonds?
Yeah, so that's 2 questions, and I'll take them in part. The books are very summary. So I have a background in economics. I do have some background in property investing. These books are extraordinarily summarized. And so there's no easy way to say, so many millions of this bond went to this item. The CAB has actually been a little better this year about stating what some of those debts go towards, but it's very unclear. So a lot of times it just gets rolled into infrastructure. What that infrastructure actually is or how much it costs, who knows? Some of that expense, it's worth noting, is the CAB has actually been at an operational deficit until maybe next year is when it might get out. So what happens is the CAB does not have enough tax revenue from our houses to even do like the administration parts of, cutting the grass and maintaining the pool and what they consider operations. So they have this backdoor agreement with the developer that every time the cab does not have enough money to do the regular operations of the community, they just borrow money straight from the developer at 8% simple interest. So which simple interest is kind of like your mortgage, right? You get charged interest based on the principal of the of the outstanding principal. So what they'll do is they rack up this account, right, of all the unpaid cab bills. They borrow money from the developer, and then eventually they'll try to wrap that into one of these bonds. The bonds come in these really different flavors. Some are what are like senior, which is what like a pension fund might buy. We have to pay those right away. But they'll also take some of that money and they'll issue what are called junior subordinate bonds. Those bonds have higher interest rates, and they're also on a compounding schedule instead of a simple schedule. So rather than the principal accruing interest and you get interest on the principal every month, they actually allow those bonds to go unpaid. And when they do that, you actually end up paying interest on the interest as well. So it might say something like, hey, the average rate on this bond is 7%, which Kellen commented, that 8% is high. Well, 7% is also pretty high for a municipal bond. And then when you take into account it's compounding, so you're actually paying interest on the interest. There is no voting procedure that you and I get to authorize those debts. I actually proposed to my board earlier this year that we host a Tabor election. I actually proposed the Tabor election that would make it so that you would have to authorize that debt via a vote, same way you voted on 5A and 5B in Douglas County this year for paying teachers. It does make me extraordinarily frustrated that we have to have a Tabor election to pay teachers and construct schools, but the developer has more or less an open line of credit on your house and doesn't have to ask. That seems like a wild asymmetry to me. But as of now, the developer picks when they will be issuing debt. You and I just kind of were along for the ride. Go ahead, John.
Well, yeah, no, I was just going to add too that in terms of the accountability, one of the first questions we were asking, and one of the first questions we're trying to get cities and counties to ask is, what happens to the money that residents pay for the developed lot? Where's that money? Because if there was enough money to pay for the pipes in the ground when you bought your house, then why are we here? Why are we even talking about this? So anyway, but yeah, ditto on everything that you said, Jim. That's great.
Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's so many questions that I have, but thanks everybody for all great information. The article that I read months ago, shortly after we purchased our house, was about a district where the development did not complete. The developer exited the picture and the debt was left to be paid by the houses that got built, which to me is the nightmare scenario. I didn't realize that we weren't up to 1.8 billion already, so I'm happy that we haven't reached that. But I guess the only point that I'd like to make is we should try to be careful not to really trash Sterling Ranch, or we could get ourselves into that situation where it doesn't get completed, and that would be the worst possible case. The other question I had is how closely we could possibly look at the detailed numbers of what the CAB is spending. I went to one Metro District meeting where the budget was discussed and the numbers were extremely high level. Do you guys get to see more detailed numbers than that? And do you have time to even dig through them, or should the Metro Districts maybe be hiring a CPA if they could possibly spend any money on that to dig through and make sure that the money's being spent at least wisely?
Yeah, so good question. Oh, John's got a hand up, so.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, that's part of the problem, right? Because the only thing that your district gets to do is pass a budget that says all of the money that just came in the door is going right out the door to the CAB. There's no line item budgeting decisions being made by your elected representatives. All of those decisions are being made by the CAB. That detailed budget that I showed you, that's a CAB budget. It's not your district budget. And they have 5 votes and you only have 1. So that's part of the challenge. And just real quick, we one of our members had that happen, had the developer leave their district, and there's plenty of people out there who want to build houses in nice residential areas. So you won't have any trouble getting another developer, and you'll be able to have more to say probably about who that developer is and somebody you can work with, as opposed to somebody who's trying to take advantage of you.
Yeah, very good point, John. I'm going to go to Carrie, who had a question in the chat. Before I do, I just wanted to kind of also mention that what Barry had mentioned. That is a common line, Barry, by the developers of big communities. They try to scare you into that tactic of be careful not to mess with us because we'll leave your development undone and you'll be SOL. That's absolutely not correct. It is a scare tactic. There are tons of people who would love to come in and finish up based on what you guys would want. Carrie Bart asks, how do we go about walking away from the cab? Is it individually or as a full metro district?
Yep. So the action has to happen at the metro district level. So I would argue that both metro districts 2 and 3 ought to leave. Is my preference. And as John pointed out, you could have a variety of ways of what leave means. But if CAB were like a good thing, right? Like a force for good, you'd have people electing it that had interests aligned with the residents, right? You'd have essentially your metro district boards would be the CAB board. Well, there's no reason that metro districts 2 and 3 couldn't have an IGA that does similar functions, right? Ensures that you have similar community standards, but then your actual elected representatives, the people paying taxes with you, would get to pick, what gets built, what's affordable, what you actually want your covenants to be. Do you want people driving around in a car to enforce them? So it's definitely something that has to be done. It must be done at the metro district level. We can't individually, like I can't say that my house is no longer a part of the CAB. That's not an option that's open. But your metro district board of directors could make such decisions. And I think it's worth underlining, John, this wasn't part of your presentation. We're not unique. Like the CAB setup is new. It's, as John mentioned, it's kind of like the 3rd iteration of developers attempting to maintain control of their built developments to fund their new developments and pocket the tax money along the way. But there are other communities in Colorado, notably Flying Horse in Colorado Springs, is sort of like steps ahead of us. So I mentioned I tried to get a Tabor ballot measure passed, actually 2 measures. They did it, right? They actually went out and put it to their voters. Would you like your Tabor protections back? Turns out people said yes. I think between 4 and 7 different communities have done those kinds of ballot measures this last year. So they did it at the metro district level. They didn't wait for their developer board to give them permission. They just did it. Same thing happened with their IGA. Remember, the CAB is the result of an intergovernmental agreement. They said, this isn't really working for us anymore. We're gonna renegotiate this agreement, right? And that's another option. Is you could have a CAB agreement where you're gonna work with the developer because you want to see the community built, but you want an actual hand on the wheel, right? The situation we have now is you kind of have a token say, and you have some lip service committees that can tell the developer what we'd want, and if they're relatively ambivalent about, do you want a dog park or a pickleball court, they'll kind of throw you a bone and make it happen. If you have control of your metro district, you could say no, which is a pretty powerful thing. I hope that answers your question about individually.
Carrie's got a follow up, Jim, but I'm going to go to Mark next, and then Carrie, I'll definitely come back to you so you can follow up on that question. Mark, I'm going to ask you to mute and you go right ahead.
Hi, this is actually Rama.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Rama.
Yeah, this is Mark's wife.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, So my question is why can't we divorce from CAB and become an HOA, or is that a viable option? What's the difference? Like, I know Solstice is an HOA.
I think they actually are both. I'll let John talk about the actual legal implications.
Yeah, so great question. I mean, we all have grown up with HOAs and various permutations, but HOAs and metro districts are totally two different universes. HOA is a private contract. You actually have all those documents, have an opportunity to review them, and when you sign that contract creating or becoming a member of an HOA. It's not a government, it's a contractual private association. Metro District is totally different animal. It's a government. They can tax, they can put a lien on your house, they can do eminent domain. It's a government, and it operates the way, at least supposed to operate, the way we're used to operating self-governments. Elections, representatives, public hearings, you have an opportunity to participate as an equal voice. And that's why a lot of people get confused by thinking, well, it's like an HOA, and in HOAs, the developers have a right to do whatever they want to until they leave. Not in metro districts. They just have one vote, and that's assuming they actually live there and pay taxes or own property. So very different animals, and what there's overlap to the extent that things like taking care of the lawns, covenant enforcement, some of those things have come under the Metro District umbrella, but it's still through the operation of the government. In our community, for example, the only thing the HOA took care of was making sure we didn't paint our houses purple and trash. And not one of us really had any ambition of participating on the HOA, but we were all about the Metro District because that's where the money was. That's where our taxes were being spent, and where we're being taxed heavily.
Great. Carrie, you got a follow-up? I just asked you to unmute if you'd like to follow up.
This is actually Brandon, her husband. Sorry, same situation as last time. But
that's okay.
So I asked the question if we can walk away individually or is it as a whole district? Well, since it's as a whole district, is it a simple majority? Is it a 75%, 67% majority that needs to vote to walk away? What is the outcome that has to happen? And I think we're in District 3, Pulte.
So
we haven't fully built up yet.
Yep. So it's actually a vote by your board of directors. And like I said, sort of to wrap things up, it does take small sustained action from, people like us on the call, mostly to, hold your board accountable and elect board members who, if that's really what we want, will do those things. So it would be your Metro District board. If you are in Prospect Village or Ascent Village, you're in District 3. I did see Greg King is on this call, and he's actually one of your board reps. He will, there's sort of a spectrum of how people feel about the cabs. We're sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum, so he'll give you his opinion, I'm sure. But essentially, your board of directors could vote to start to rescind some of these agreements. The cab agreement is an IGA. If you're from Colorado, you might remember Tri-County Health, right? At one point, regardless of how you think about their policy with COVID and everything, they decided Douglas County decided they didn't like the Tri-County Health COVID policy, and then they left, right? It's an agreement. It's not set in stone. Agreements change. So your Metro District board would be the ones to extract themselves from that agreement. And I'm sorry, I'm sort of long-winded and forgot the second half of your question.
I forgot to unmute them. If you have a follow-up, but he didn't get to it, please put it in the chat and you can do it directly to me and I'll try to ask it for you. Rob's asking, what are the CAB's rights regarding what we can or can't do on our own individual property?
Great question for John.
That was on the covenants.
What are the CAB's rights regarding what we can or cannot do on our own individual property?
Yeah, so under the CAB agreement that we looked at, the covenants, again, what you can do to your house, holiday decorations, whatever it may be. I haven't looked at yours, but I've seen some where they measure the length of the grass. At any rate, that falls under the CAB. The CAB manages that. However, the agreement also provides that the districts can terminate that function and take it on themselves. And not too surprisingly, because oftentimes that gets a little contentious and the developers seem to have a tolerance for that is measured in terms of, well, once I've sold all my houses, I don't care. So once you get close to that point, they'd be happy to have you take that over. So that may be something you would want to explore again through your board. The board of directors would have the ability to initiate that.
So I did actually bring that up at one of the Metro meetings. More than anything, I think it's sort of a poor way to spend money to pay people to drive around and enforce the covenants. Like for me, if it's a big enough violation of the covenants, like I should have to go tell the CAB to ask you to change your behavior. I don't know that we need to spend our tax money on having full-time people drive around and write you up. And that's just sort of my take. But it's an interesting question about what rights the CAB has. That has actually been discussed in the recent, the state launched a Metro District Task Force, which is basically just a committee to investigate some of the dirtier aspects of Metro districts. And one of the questions that's been raised is, what authority should Metro districts have to enforce community covenants? So you're not the only person with that question. It's being asked at the state level.
James, do you want to go ahead with yours? You had your hand up. Right ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm a resident of Ascent, District 3. First, John, thanks for the presentation. It was very informative. And Jim, thanks for hosting this. Jim, I just have a clarification question. You said, I believe, that once the community is built out, the developer can still retain control of the CAB and its taxing power because it has 5 seats on District 1. And I realize the build out is a long way away, but with 7 districts, that would mean districts 2 through 7 each have 1 vote, which is 6 votes. The developer is sitting in District 1 with 5 votes. So how can the developer still retain control under that scenario?
Yep. So think about the map as like a coloring board, right? District 1 is that postage stamp. They could make District 6, right? They could just keep that postage stamp as well and wrap everything else up into 4, 5, and 7.
Okay.
So if you're strategic, right, you could just make the rest of the development fit into 4 metro districts instead of 6.
I see. I didn't know they could change that. Okay.
Yeah. So what happens, and this is I'm pretty sure what happens. Don't quote me. I'm pretty sure the way that it works is when they're getting ready to do a new filing, they'll take the land that's part of that filing and increase one of those postage stamps to become, the area of this new filing. So right now they're actually starting District 4. Well, 2 years ago, District 4 would have just been one of those postage stamps in the corner of the map. So if you wanted to be strategic, right, you would just continue to grow enough postage stamps, but retain 2 of them. And as long as you're strategic about which 2 you keep, you have that majority.
Got it. Thanks much.
Thank you, James. Trying to skim through some of the chat. Jennifer asked, does anyone involved with the cab, DevCo, et cetera, have a fiduciary responsibility to us?
I was going to leave that to John.
Yeah, absolutely. Under the state statutes, every public official has a fiduciary duty to the people, to the individuals. The unfortunate thing from my experience in metro districts is the fact that there's no enforcement results in no exercise of the fiduciary duty. I mean, when you begin with a group of folks who are voting to eliminate your right to vote, right off the bat, within a couple of weeks after the service plan is approved, they violated a fiduciary duty. That's pretty fundamental. So those are important words, but for folks in positions of power in the metro districts, my experience, they're just words. And it's complicated a little bit because all government entities are subject to the enforcement of the rules of ethics, except metro districts. And last year, when we tried to persuade the legislature to include metro districts within the purview, the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission, the industry fought it tooth and nail, and the committee chairpersons and the leadership in the legislature killed it. So it is there, it is important, but as a practical matter, there's no such thing for that group of folks. And even with some of the attorneys, there's no such thing as a conflict of interest. You know, I could share some more stories about that, but at any rate, so that's part of the challenge is, yes, it's there, but it's not recognized by the folks who are in a position to do it.
So one point I wanted to circle back to a little bit was Barry's about the developer and not wanting the developer to walk away, and you know, John and JD kind of saying, you know, in their experience, there's plenty of people that will want to develop that very profitable land. It's worth noting, and a few people did ask about, you know, the water situation. So we're in an interesting situation as a metro district in that our water provider is also heavily invested in and founded by the developer. I'm reasonably certain that Lumiere, the company doing all the streetlights and sort of acting as an intermediary between you and Quantum or CenturyLink or whoever they are this week, I'm pretty sure that's also owned by that same development company. And of course, they own the financing arm, you know, that's financing a lot of these cab debts. So they're a private development company, financier. They're invested in the water board. They're also invested in your telco. So there's actually quite a bit of ways for them to make money without having an open line of credit on your house. It just seems to me extraordinarily petty to to threaten to withdraw from a community after they've made quite a few statements about wanting it to be, you know, wanting it to be a great place in a forward-thinking community in Colorado, to, you know, throw a bit of a tantrum that we're gonna not allow you to indebt us indefinitely. You know, that seems a little counterintuitive with all the other revenue sources they have. Jason has a hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Jason in just a second. There's a question from the chat. Mentioned a 20-year life for the current cab based on the vote from 2013. Is there a way to force a vote based on the number of residents or a petition or something?
Really, what you're getting at is a very obvious question: is why can't we use a citizen initiative to introduce legislation or ballot issues to make changes. And the problem is, once again, citizen initiatives are available to cities, most counties, certainly at the state level, but not metro districts. So we're kind of the stepchild. And again, we tried to get that change with the legislature, and leadership just wouldn't have it. And there's a lot of money in stake, right? I mean, there are billions and billions of dollars at stake, and consequently, lots of lobbying money, and it's hard to get the leadership to pay any attention to the merits of these issues while they're trying to fill seats in the House or the Senate. So really, the way this thing is structured, your leverage points are through your district. The first thing you do is you get resident control 100% of your district, and you have that. So you're already one step ahead. The next thing you need to do is start making motions and voting on those district boards for change.
Once again, Jason Casse can help you coordinate in terms of showing up and what's going to happen and why it's important to go.
Thanks, Jim and John and everybody for the meeting. I wanted to give an example of how we don't have a say in how our tax revenue is spent. I was at, I don't know which one of the meetings I was at. It could have been the RAC or something like that. They were talking about the splash pad again, and they brought in a designer and he gave a presentation, and they were talking about that it's going to cost $150,000 of our tax revenue that they've already collected for them to pay the gentleman for his design, as well as partially pay for the splash pad, and that they would possibly do a partial demolition this year, but it's now the end of the year, so I don't even know if they've done anything. And then they would do some next year, and they talked about all of these problems with the splash pad and stuff like that. So it's just an example of, we're on the third or fourth rendition of the splash pad, and here's $150,000 being spent to do something that, if you drive by Highlands Ranch, Westridge, on Highlands Ranch Parkway across the street from the King Supers, you could see their splash pad, and it's, it's a safe, ADA compliant splash pad. But yeah, I just wanted to give another example of that. And yeah, please reach out to me and I can get you guys added to the list and stuff.
Jason,
By the way, we also paid for each iteration of that.
Oh yes, that's right. We've also paid for 1, 2, and 3 of the splash pad. That's right.
Yeah. Jason, how do people get in touch with you? Do you want to provide an email? Is there a way that they can?
Yeah, you can look at me find me on Facebook. I'll post my email address here, and then could add you guys. Yeah, just let me know.
Excellent. Jason's email is at the bottom of the chat for people to see. Kellen, you mentioned something. Yeah, no, it's all good. Confrontational. We're all about having good disagreements and being respectful of each other. Greg, she's asking for your perspective as a resident of District 3 and someone who voted for him in the last election. I'm not sure what that was referring to specifically. But
JD, there's a person in the lobby, Greg King.
Okay.
Greg, I hope you don't feel put on the spot. If you don't, feel free to chime in.
Is Greg still in the?
I can see him on the sort of the participants that are listed here.
Okay. Greg, would you like to speak up? Would you like to say something? Raise your hand if you'd like to. Don't see his hand. There we go. Okay, that might be what it is. I'll go ahead and unmute the Jennifer G. Maybe that's him. I'm not sure.
No, it's not. So if Greg is on, I can wait.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I don't see him yet, so feel free. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I had a sense of what would replace the current structure. Would it be 6 or whatever independent metro districts, all taking over just their parts of the neighborhood, or would we need to create some new confederation of metro districts? I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, the truth is, we should figure out what people want, right? you could have it where Providence Village is its own entity. Ascent and Prospect Village are their own entity, and they do operate independently. That's one way to go about it. Honestly, I feel like that's something that could be discussed, right? And so you probably get some economies of scale once you start talking about having them partner up for things like trash and landscaping, right? Maintenance for sidewalks. So, you know, that's still open to interpretation. And you could even have an agreement where, you know, those two districts, if they did separate, would come into some sort of an amended agreement with the developer, where they say, hey, you know, we're gonna have an agreement, but since we pay the taxes and since we live with the consequences of the decisions made here, you know, we're gonna have a real hand on the wheel. So I think that's open to interpretation. I certainly have an opinion, and I think all the board members would have an opinion. Probably everyone has an opinion, but you know, you're not necessarily bound to one or the other. It's not, you know, if you leave the cab, it's every man for himself. So, you know,
Yeah, that's a really great question.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's a really great question because people want to know how to move forward, and Jim's exactly right. There are multiple ways in which you can figure out how you want to run your community. The key is that you as residents will be determining that, and that's the big factor.
Yeah, Barry chimed in on the chat with, you know, there are shared amenities, and you know, he's right. I also don't want to duplicate effort. So I think I mentioned this earlier. One potential solution is you have an IGA between districts 2 and 3, where you set up, you know, cost sharing and amenity sharing agreement, right? And as the developer builds out new districts, as they, you know, transition to resident control, those could even, you know, become included. So one of the recent things that the CAB did was they essentially said, we're going to break up, I believe it was District 4 and District 7 into sub-districts, right? Have those be treated as if they're, you know, basically say that those are valid. So you could have an agreement where you say, all right, we're going to start out as districts 2 and 3, and we're going to handle the operations and maintenance over here. And then as District 4 gets built out, they can also be included in the fold if they'd like to. So that, as Jen put it, would be like the Confederation of Metro Districts. Anyway, Greg's got his hand up, and I've talked long enough.
So I'm just curious, what did you want me to weigh in on?
Kellen had mentioned in the chat that, you know, he'd like to sort of hear your take.
Kellen, was there something specific that you?
Yeah, I mean, was there something specific?
Yeah, I'm asking her. I unmuted her too.
Yeah, I'm a man, but all good.
Sorry.
No, all good. Yeah, no, I mean, just like as our elected representative, obviously we've got Jim's perspective, which is District 2. We've heard a number of challenges and questions from the various people on this call, and obviously this is a group of people that are motivated the same way. But I know, Greg, perhaps you have a different perspective on the what the CAB brings to the table, or whether or not we should explore some sort of different governing board. I would just like to hear your opinion as our representative.
Well, I think one of the things we have to establish here, because John was comparing Metro District to an HOA, and the real comparison there is HOA to CAB. CAB manages your community. HOA manages your community. So those would be basically your two choices, right? Is a HOA or a CAB. You still have you still need the same function fulfilled. You need somebody to manage the community, correct? Yeah. I mean, we all agree with that. None of us have time to actually manage an entire community. So you have to weigh the difference in benefits and disadvantages to going with a HOA versus a CAB. But those are the two entities that you should be comparing.
So that's not strictly true. Your Metro District could manage itself. You know, that's why they have community managers. So, you know,
you still have to hire somebody to manage your community, though. I mean, as a Metro District board member yourself and myself, We don't
That's
have the
correct.
time or ability to manage, so we have to hire somebody to manage the community, correct?
That is
Okay.
correct. You just
Right.
mentioned that the comparison is not Metro District to HOA, it's cab to HOA. It doesn't have to be. It could be Metro District to HOA if you wanted to make such a comparison. But again, as John outlined, like a Metro District is not an HOA, it's a government. An HOA is not a government.
Well, we're
John,
talking
you
about,
have your hand up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, to be clear, there are certain things that happen in every community where if you have the opportunity or the need, you collectively get together and take care of those things, whether it's mowing the lawn or taking care of the swimming pool or the tennis courts, what have you. The HOA versus the CAB doesn't really work because they're two different animals. The HOA, again, is a private contract. The CAB is a government authority. And so if you look at it in terms of the function, okay, we need somebody to mow the lawns and pay for that. You can do anything. I mean, you can set up a separate association to do that. You don't need an HOA. You don't even need a Metro District. You just organize yourselves and however you want to do it. If you have a Metro District, it can be convenient to do those things through the Metro District manager, and it's just a simple function, but you don't need to get wrapped around the axle about is it an HOA or a Metro District. You just do it, and you don't have the tail wagging the dog. You have the Metro District, and you can do whatever you want to through that, or just put together an association. But you don't need a CAB, and you don't need an HOA to perform those functions.
And you also don't need the developer telling you what to do. So, Greg, I know you and I are on opposite sides of the aisle, but does it not make you a little bit uncomfortable that the developer could issue hundreds of millions of dollars worth of debt, and all you can do is say, I don't like that, but you have no real control. And sorry, Greg, you went on mute as I was speaking.
I asked him to unmute if he wanted to respond as well. So if he feels like he wants to, he can.
so I want to mute again. Okay.
Yeah, I did it because I wasn't sure if you were done.
No, so I'm used to the Zoom sessions where we have discussions like this. I'm on Zoom all day long. So I wanted to get back to Kellen's question. I want to make sure I understand it. So here's my agenda. Okay. Everybody has an agenda. Here's my agenda. I moved to a community to have oversight because I come from a community where you had 6 or 7 cars down the street. Some guy had a driveway with 6 or 7 cars in it, and half of them are in some disrepair. People growing weeds, and just like don't even have a lawn. It's all weeds. I wanted to live in a community that is safe and clean and attractive. That's what I came here for. I did not know that I was going to be coming in to a community where people were not happy with a community they moved into that has a cab, which fulfills the same function. It may not have the same structure or legal structure as an HOA, but it fulfills the same function. I think we can all agree with that. You have to have somebody that manages the community. Anyway, what I'd like to do is, my agenda is that instead of complaining about things, why don't we all just work together and communicate? That's what I'm about. Why can't we be happy and communicate in a positive way with this management? Whether it's an HOA or a cab, you need to just have this ability to talk to people and not call them thieves or crooks or some criminal activity behind their motivation. I'm just saying, and that's my agenda. Can we please just work together without having to make people villains out of people?
And I think because I used to be a person at my company that would complain about things all the time, and I would tell the executives how bad their decisions were, and I would tell other managers and other coworkers how stupid they were, and it got me nowhere. In fact, made me the classic jerk, right? And when I finally had somebody point that out to me, that you might get more cooperation from people if you were nice. And when I changed that, and back in 2010, when I changed my attitude and my approach to getting things done, being nice instead of making everybody a villain, then everything started changing in my life and going the right direction. And that's my agenda here with everybody here is, can we please just be nice to people and talk to them like they're just another person, and you can get things done that way. And that's all I wanted to say. I hope that answers your question, Kellen.
Thanks for your perspective, Greg. I just want to say, I don't believe anybody here has been complaining. I think we're having a very good open discussion. So I really appreciate that you had your perspective. Matt, did you have something? I'll unmute you.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to add, I guess, a few things to kind of the conversation, some perspective too. I actually also, for those on here that aren't not aware with me, my name is Matt Collins. I actually served on the Metro District 2 board was one of the first resident boards when we first moved in here in 2018, and then had the opportunity to serve on the board between, gosh, what was it, right around 2019, 2020. I want to, I guess, make the point across, like, I don't necessarily, and I think kind of go off what Greg and everything, kind of what you're saying as well, is I don't think that metro districts necessarily are like just a terrible thing. However, the way that the CAB has set up, just over my personal experience over the years, and just trying to deal with the developer and just trying to get something as simple as, can we have more of a decision-making process in the community? It's frustrating to say the least, because again, we moved into this community kind of, Greg, the same way. We wanted to be in a community where, yes, there's a covenant control, but we didn't expect where we didn't have the opportunity as residents to control those covenants. Or have a say in how and who we hire and how our money is spent, and how that's being, who we hire even as just someone to cut our grass, like what John's referencing. I actually, myself and one other board member at one point tried to, out of kind of a good faith, try to negotiate with the developer to try to amend the original CAB IGA agreement to allow for more, I guess you could say, even on a small level, of even as something as simple as throw us a bone to be able to control our own covenants. And that meeting, I can tell you, did not go, I guess, it basically came out of that meeting with no resolution, or no I guess you could say progress towards anything. And so I think that as well, at least for me, it's kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, this is not your typical, and we've had issues over the years with, the jellyfish lighting and just something as simple as that. So, it's a, I'm not here to try to complain, and I don't think a lot of people here are. I think it's more or less, we just want to have more control over, costs of our investment as well in our community. So, or our investment in this community as well. So, just wanted to add that to some perspective as well.
Nice, thanks, Matt.
Yep.
I see one more. Are there specific issues we have the power to change now? And then there's a reference to, personally rather changing security service driving around, praising with the summer break-ins rather than the holiday decoration police person. So that's a question that's out there.
So the only real lever I know that, an individual district could pull without doing the the back away from cab option is you could take control of your own covenant enforcement. So that would mean that the Metro District Board would have to basically issue notices and fines and whatnot. Like I said, I mentioned that at the District 2 board meeting a while back. Hey, could we save some money on our covenant enforcement by going to more of the old school, your neighbor has to narc on you type system. As far as I know, that's about all you can do. And the reasoning is pretty simple. As part of the cab establishment agreement, one of the provisions in there is that your district cannot keep any of its own money. So, when you say what can we do, it basically has to be free, or maybe you can fund it with a GoFundMe or something. But if the cab does not agree to what you'd like to get done, as long as you're operating in the context of the cab agreement, you're probably a little stuck. Because I agree. If I'm going to pay someone to drive around, I'd rather they look for car break-ins than you put your skeletons up on September 29th. Is my personal take.
Just a quick question on that. If we were to opt out and the Metro District started to enforce the covenants, does that mean that the Metro District can also alter the covenants for that district? Or do they just have to enforce what the cab decides?
Nope. So if you rescind your participation in the cab agreement, right? The cab's the one that came up with the covenants. So, a frequent sticking point for some people is, just like Greg said, I would like there to be some rules. I agree. I personally love motorsports, but I don't necessarily want, people to have a broken down Camaro on their lawn. So, if you were your own Metro District operating independently, yes, you would be able to write your own covenants and then, hire a management company to do some of your management, including, if someone did say, hey, Barry's got weeds that are like out of control on his property, then, the management company or the board could issue the notices about your violation of those covenants. And you could also pick the enforcement schedule, right? So like one of the things that someone pointed out to me is the way that the weed enforcement goes here. It's basically like a year long between violations. You'll sort of hit from the courtesy notice to the potential fine, which is tough if you're next to some of those open areas, like not the green belts, but the totally like undeveloped, what may be Burns Park one day area. If you get dinged in June and then again the next May, that's actually you're like going up the violation scale. Whereas I think a reasonable person might say, okay, you totally had your weeds cleaned up early July. There's no reason this is a continuation of the same offense. So again, sort of long-winded, but yeah, you would be able to write your own covenants and then enforce them as you saw fit.
How would you pay a management company if you're not allowed to spend any money? Would you have to have a separate fee or something?
No, so keep in mind, if you're out of the cab agreement, right, you're also out of funding the cab. There's still the debt. So right now you have two mill levies, an operations mill levy and a debt service mill levy. And John can talk more about the debt service side. You're probably stuck with debt service, and you're gonna have to service some amount of debt, which is why your taxes are double Douglas County taxes by themselves, right? The cab is actually 53% of your tax bill. So you still have to pay the debt service part. You could actually renegotiate some of that debt to say, do I really owe you this $100 million junior bond over here that the developer still owns, John? I'd be grateful if you could touch on that. So you still have to pay the bonds, but you definitely don't need to pay the operations mill levy if you're no longer paying them to do the operations. So
all of the operations, not just covenant enforcement, but all of the maintenance within that Metro District, everything.
Right. So
you're taking over.
Right. And so that's what you would hire a property manager for.
Sure. Thanks.
Go ahead, Greg.
Hey, okay, so if I understand correctly, we what you're saying is that we could replace the cost that we're putting into paying the cab for operations and maintenance and transfer that same amount of money to another organization to do the same thing, or is that right? I mean, basically.
Depends on if you think the cab's costs are reasonable or not.
Yeah, okay. I'm just, well, I mean, think about it. I mean, we just took one organization, we're just substituting it for another organization. How much farther are you ahead with that?
Well, one organization is also able to issue debt without you having a say so. So that's a pretty big advantage in my mind.
But you're building a community here, right?
Would you like
I
to have a
mean,
say in the cost and what gets built?
yeah, I do. Yeah, sure. But how is that going to, how are we transferring our, by getting rid of the cab and then hiring another company? And I have friends that live in HOA controlled communities, and they have the same issues. I mean, it's, you know, uh, I mean, I've done a little research here, and these HOAs, for example, let's see, Mountain Gate 2. I have a friend that lives in Mountain Gate 2, and he talked about the HOA there, the board, they don't seem to listen to people, and they want to keep the fees low on the HOAs, and then they build up, so they have roofs that they're going to disrepair, and then the insurance companies won't insure their townhomes anymore, and then all of a sudden they're hit with these special assessments, right? At Mountain Gate 2, it was let's see, $40,000 they had to come up with in one lump sum because they didn't collect enough HOA fees, because the people that were running the HOA weren't really listening to the residents. I mean, I'm afraid, that's all I'm saying, is I'm afraid that you're going to trade one group of people that you kind of listen to you for another group of people that kind of listen to you, and that you're paying money into either way, and you still have the same, you kind of got somebody that sort of listens to you.
Got it.
What is the advantage?
Some folks have hands up. Are you guys looking to reply?
Yeah, I can respond real quickly. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, as I think everyone agrees, there's that function that has to be performed. Right now, you don't have a say. You only have one vote, they have 5. So when you say listening to you, I'm not sitting at those meetings, but my guess is that the CAB board really isn't listening. Whereas if you have your board, your group, one that you created, one that you vote for, one that's accountable to you, you're going to have much more accessibility, and I anticipate more response. I mean, the bottom line is, if you don't like them, you can vote them out of office. You can't do that with a CAB. You're stuck with those 5 people from that small little piece of yellow on the map. And the other factor that that Jim points to is the CAB is not just taking care of the lawns and the covenants; they're also imposing debt, and that debt is to pay back the developer for money they already had or they get to build your infrastructure. And keep in mind that one of the confusing points is that the metro districts are the ones building the community. That relationship is and always will be between the developer and the city. The metro district isn't there to build the development. It's there to pay back the developer for money that they spent, again, assuming they're entitled to it and you didn't already pay them when you bought the lot. But so your job isn't to build the community. Your job is to pay the developer back for for money that he spent in putting the pipes in the ground. That's all there is to it. And unfortunately, the way these things have evolved in Colorado is the real reason the developers want to maintain control and also race to issue the what I call faux bonds that really aren't bonds is to lock the residents into debt, my opinion, but based upon our empirical study and evidence, to pay big profits, not to pay back the actual cost of the pipes in the ground. And that's, you know, that's a problem because that's an abuse and there's no check and balance unless you have the right to vote for them. And you don't if they've got 5 and you only have 1. So that vote really means something and it gives you access that you don't have now.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to add real quick too, as a follow-up. As far as going back to the whole kind of management type side of thing between the CAB and Metro District, I don't know if it's the same way now, but at least when I was on the board, the actual employees of the CAB are actually a good majority of them. There's a few that are actually employees now of the CAB, but the CAB also contracts already with a management company, and a lot of the employees of the CAB are part of a management company. So really, I mean, kind of going back to Jim and John's point and everyone else's point is if you know we were to break away from a CAB agreement, it's just more or less we could elect to still continue to use the same management company to help manage, like you said, to the operational side of this community. But now we're just having the opportunity, at least from a Metro District Board, the elected residents of this community to make those decisions on who we are actually utilizing for that management contract. And whether we feel like they're doing a great job managing it, we can, we can look at other options or keep the same company in place that we currently have. But currently, as it stands right now, we really don't have much of that opportunity when it comes to that, at least on a board level from the Metro District Board, from actual elected residents. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Response? Great. Greg, coming back to you if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks. So Matt, just so you know, that management company, they actually all are employed by the CAB now. That's where Jessica came from, I guess. That's what I heard. So the only thing that I'd like to say is, so, you know, I'm a representative here for you. You guys voted for me a little bit. Okay, not everybody voted for me. But, you know, whether you voted for me or not, I am truly here to try and listen to what you guys want. I bring up these points at these meetings, and I do. I can tell you right now that the people on the CAB are listening to us, right? And Harold is also the developer, right? I can guarantee you he is, a forceful guy, but he is reasonable, and he seems to listen to things. And we can't all have these, we all want people, we want our way. Like I wanted pickleball courts across the street from me. I can't have pickleball courts across the street from me because it doesn't work for a lot of people here. Okay, it wasn't affordable, and it didn't work for a lot of people. So I'm not there just to get my own way. I'm there to get your way. We all have different things that we want, and we can't all of us get all of those things. And the last little point I'll make here, right, is this trying to manage the community ourselves. I mean, who here wants to manage a community for nothing, free. If you get rid of an HOA or you don't have or the cab, one of the two, you don't have either one of them, then you have to say, like Matt was just saying, you have to hire somebody to do that for you, because nobody here is going to want to, spend their free time managing a community. And so we're just making a trade-off for one for the other to achieve the same goal and have the same result.
So Greg, I think we've covered the management piece. I don't think anyone's confused about that. It's important to note that the whole enterprise we're describing here is not that there's an overriding unanimity in terms of what people want. It's that when you vote, it should matter, right? I don't think people should elect folks that have almost no power to actually do the things that those people want. That's why John brought up the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, right? Your constituents elected you, and it should be you making the decisions about what happens with those constituents' money and what gets built and what's affordable. I don't think you should ask the developer nicely. I don't think that should be the result of the election, is that you must then ask permission from someone who stripped your residents of their constitutional rights. So I take your point that management costs money, but it might actually even be reasonable to have somewhat more expensive management if you at least have a say in what that management does. So I think that's pretty, I think that's maybe the fundamental difference is, you mentioned earlier, like your exact words were, "I came here to be managed." I think a lot of the folks on this call would like us to see a little more self-governance than just being told what to do. Now there's two other people with hands up, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, so I kind of want to jump into what Greg said. Like, I agree. Like, I think some sort of management in the area is good. Like, I also don't want broken down cars that lower my property values, but I would like to have a say in what those regulations are. And right now, if I want to go have jellyfish lights put on my house, I can go tell you as my representative, hey, I would like jellyfish lights. You can go then talk to Harold, and Harold's like, no, I don't like jellyfish lights. So I don't care how many people tell me they want jellyfish lights to be in the neighborhood. I don't like them, so thou shalt not have jellyfish lights. I think what I'm hearing on this call asking for is not to get away from having some sort of management company, because no one who lives in the community really does have that time to do that management. But what we're saying is, let's have the management maybe be at the metro district level with people that we elect in, like yourself, Greg, and Jim. And if we then bring those points to Greg or Jim and you're not listening to us, okay, then let's get rid of you in the next election. But right now, if I want something that's not happening, say jellyfish lights, I can't ever make that happen because Harold says I don't like it.
Thank you, Caitlin. Gina, did you want to chime in? And then we're probably gonna try to wrap. Yeah.
I just wanted to give a perspective. I am the president of my metro district. I live in Fort Lupton, and we recently took control from the developer. And one of the first things that we did is we considered management companies. We had a management company that was loyal to the developer. And when the residents are in control, what we did is we interviewed some management companies and we decided what kind of management services our residents needed with resident input. So we have a management company now, and if they're not doing a good job or if they're not listening to us, we have the full capability of terminating their contract. So they are invested in us as representatives of the residents to do a good job. One of the things that came up recently is we didn't have anything in our guidelines about barbecue grills on porches. So we had a meeting and we wanted to know what residents felt about that. Like, is it okay if we store them here? Maybe it's okay, but we roll it out when we use it, things like that. So when you have people who are in control, who really are representative of the residents, there is no reason why you couldn't hire a management company that has loyal to the board of residents, that I have no doubt will provide better services to the residents than any kind of developer management company.
Thanks for that perspective, Gina. Okay, Jim, I'll send it back to you. Wrap up, John. Anyone?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone that's here. CMDR folks, thank you for coming by. Once again, you know, they didn't charge us $1. John reviewed dozens of documents. He spent hours looking at our stuff just to tell you what the options are. This could end up everyone decides we really love the cab and we don't want to make any changes. And he reviewed the documents anyway. So John, thank you. JD, thank you for helping facilitate. Gina, thanks for weighing in and giving an outside perspective. And thanks to everyone on the call. Like I said at the beginning, I know it's tough during the holidays to like take a Friday evening to go over dry things like cab budgets and government structures. So I appreciate your time, especially since we went more than an hour over. I appreciate you.
John, anything from?
No, have a great holiday, everybody. It was a real pleasure meeting you all. And you know, the bottom line is whatever you decide is the right decision because you decided. So go for it and best to everybody.
Yep. And last thing before you do split, if you would like to be involved, please do reach out to Jason Casse. He's available on Facebook, and I think his email was shared in the chat for this the now very lengthy chat that I can't scroll through quickly. So yeah, please do reach out to him on Facebook. Feel free to reach out to me as well.
And we will find a way. This recording will be sent to John, and John, I'll work with you to get it, and we'll get it to Jim somehow to post it someplace. It could be on YouTube. It could be anywhere on a cloud service so that you all can reference it and have others who weren't able to join reference it as well.
Thanks so much.
Happy holidays, everybody. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.